Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Society podcast. It is episode number 70 already. Wow. Anyway, today is Saturday, October 7th, 2017. Thank you for joining me this week. As per the new-ish show schedule, this is an all-news show this week. Before we get to the news, I don't think I can let a show pass this week without commenting on the events in Las Vegas. If you are unaware, as I do know I have some listeners outside the United States who might not get plastered with news the way we do, a lone gunman murdered over 50 people and injured over 500 from a hotel room window in Las Vegas at a distance of about, I think, 1,000 yards. He had 33 guns with him, something like that, and had some modifications that allowed him to shoot a lot of bullets. Now, gun control in the United States has been a contentious issue for a long time. Primarily thanks to the work of the NRA, an organization that represents a very small minority of people, but they spend a lot of money and buy a lot of politicians and stoke a lot of fear and misinformation. But setting aside my own views on the idiocy of the NRA at this time, in the interest of preserving civilization, I would like to ask people to look at this moment as a time to do the obvious things, to go after the low-hanging fruit, to take a moment to think about what is reasonable. I don't really want to ban all guns. I don't think there are some liberal people who would like to repeal the Second Amendment, but let's look at some things in the middle for once. This bump stock that converted a semi-automatic into basically an automatic weapon. Why would you need those unless you were trying to kill a lot of people? High-capacity magazines. Can someone out there who is an advocate of hunting rights or self-defense in your home explain to me why you would need 60 or 100 rounds in a magazine that you could fire continuously until it was empty? There is no reasonable need for that. People who are in militias who think they gotta be protected from the government, well, let me tell you something here, militia people. The government has tanks and airplanes, jets even. They have armored vehicles of various types. They have missiles. They even have big ships that go on the ocean. I don't care what kind of gun that fires bullets you have. The only thing that's keeping the government from wiping you out is the fact that the government doesn't want to, and the government is made up of a volunteer army of your neighbors and friends, and they don't want to kill you either. Are there at least a few things we can do to meet in the middle? Can we change the magazines? Can we close the gun show loophole so that people buying at gun shows also need background checks? Not every calamity can be stopped. There are 7 billion people on the planet. Some of them are just going to be broken. And sometimes things like this will happen. And sometimes, right now, we don't have an explanation for this. We may never have an explanation for this. But that doesn't mean we should do nothing. For some people, this is not a time to talk about guns. For some people, it is the exact time to talk about guns. I guess for me, I'm asking for this to be the time to talk about the middle, finding that space where we overlap and we can agree that there are some reasonable things to do that could prevent some of this kind of thing. Maybe this guy, if he couldn't shoot hundreds of rounds a minute, wouldn't have killed nearly as many people as he did. And I'm looking for some reasonableness. I'm not looking for an extreme reaction on one side or another. I'm just looking for something reasonable. And speaking of reasonable, my last comment on this topic today, Alex Jones of InfoWars has once again, of course, labeled a tragedy as a false flag operation by the government in a conspiracy to blah, 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 blah. Alex Jones will probably never hear my show, doesn't even know I exist. It doesn't really matter. If he ever does, I want him to know I think he's an idiot. And beyond that, he is a scam artist. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's saying is BS. He just wants you to watch his show and then buy his products that he sells on his show. Alex Jones, with his off-the-wall conspiracy-mongering, fear-mongering tactics to sell a product, is a threat to civilization. And, of course, he has the freedom of speech to say pretty much whatever he likes, as long as he doesn't directly threaten someone or incite violence of some kind. He's within his boundaries to make up stuff as much as he wants. But that doesn't mean the rest of us have to buy into it. That doesn't mean we have to listen to it. So if you know someone who believes things Alex Jones says, who buys into the Prison Planet stuff, who goes to the InfoWars website, stand up and say, that's all a bunch of BS. I think most people don't buy into that, but the people who do have a loud voice, and it is destabilizing. I don't think we all have to believe the same things, but we all need to operate from the same set of verifiable facts, and Alex Jones is a con artist and a liar. And before my head just explodes, I'm going to take a breath, and we'll get on with the show. The first news item for this week's all-news show. Nobel Prizes have been announced for 2017. And among the science side of things, physics, chemistry, and physiology or medicine prizes, the Nobel Prize in Physics went to Rainier Weiss, Barry C. Barish, and Kip Thorne for, quote, decisive contributions to the LIGO detector and the observation of gravitational waves. So this is the setup that detected gravitational waves as predicted by Einstein about 100 years ago. This prize is not without its controversy. One of the reasons this observation took place a few years ago and could have been awarded a Nobel Prize right away. But I read that one of the reasons it took a while is because there were a lot of people who worked on this. And the Nobel Committee didn't want to give this prize to a group of 40 different people, although they did give the Peace Prize to an organization, so it's not like they haven't done something similar. But anyway, I guess it took them a few years to narrow it down, and I guess that's why this is labeled for decisive contributions. I guess they think that these three gentlemen have had the largest part to play in this, but there you have it. Physics. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to Jacques Dubochet, Joachim Frank, and Richard Henderson for, quote, developing cryo-electron microscopy for the high-resolution structure determination of biomolecules in solution. A very wordy and specific way of saying they developed a new method for imaging structures at the nanoscale. If you go back to listen to our nanotechnology episodes and tack this information on for a new technique for looking at really, really tiny things. And last on the science side of things, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine went to Jeffrey C. Hall, Michael Rose Bash, and Michael W. Young for their discoveries of molecular mechanisms controlling the circadian rhythm. This was actually one of the more interesting ones to me. We've sort of known about the circadian rhythm for a long time, but to have now a more detailed view of what's actually controlling it and what goes on, and to see, examine more closely, is it the same rhythm in everyone? And this may lead to treatments and things for insomnia, perhaps, or for people who have to work third shift. Maybe there's a way to flip your rhythm around. And it is also a known thing that working third shift is not really good for your health because it throws things out of whack. So discovering this molecular mechanism is a big step forward to understanding the human body, perhaps even far into the future when we're living on space stations. We'll need this kind of information as well. These prizes are all, in general, not without some controversy, too, aside from just the specific one to the LIGO detector. People have pointed out that, once again, this is another year that goes by without any women being awarded a Nobel Prize on the science things. I am not entirely certain who all is involved in the other groups that were awarded, and the economic award has not been announced yet. But on the science side, once again, no women, and people were quick to point that out. Now, sometimes I suppose a discovery rising to the level of earning a Nobel Prize just happens to be something that no women worked on. However, does that mean that there weren't any women good enough to do it? Or is this sort of the end result of the chain of events that has kept women out of a lot of things, science included? I don't personally think that we should award a Nobel Prize to a woman just for the sake of awarding it to a woman, but it does mean that we need to examine continuously the whole system and make sure that people who are of any race or gender or what have you, if they do good work, they are compensated for it. This goes all the way back to the discovery of DNA. Was not just Watson and Crick. They had a female counterpart on their team, and a lot of people think that Rosalind Franklin should be included in any discussion about the work that Watson and Crick did as well. But at any rate, there you have your Nobel Prize winners in science categories for 2017. Some medical-related news now. University of Iowa researchers use CRISPR engineering to prevent certain glaucoma in mice. A University of Iowa-led team of researchers has used the gene editing method called CRISPR-Cas9 to disrupt a mutant gene that is responsible for some forms of glaucoma, one of the most common causes of irreversible blindness. Now, they did this to eliminate a mutated myocillin protein from a mouse model of human glaucoma and cultured human cells. They discovered that their elimination of this, or disruption of this mutated protein, results in lower intraocular pressure, lower pressure inside the eye, which in turn prevents glaucoma damage to the eye. One of them, Val Sheffield, MD, PhD, Carver Chair of Molecular Genetics at the University of Iowa, was quoted as saying, "As scientists, we don't want to just discover a diseased gene. We want to understand what the gene does, and in this case, have a better understanding of glaucoma so that it can be more effectively treated." So this glaucoma affects people at a rate of about 3 to 5% of everyone over age 40. So fairly widespread, fairly common, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about it in the long term. Now, of course, this is another one of those studies where it was done in mice and works in mice, so we have ways to go to see how this works in people, but I would say it probably will. It'll probably at least be tried out, and here we are, yet another example of CRISPR and gene editing playing a role in our future health. And now, it came from outer space. Moving on to news space-related. This week, Mike Pence made an appearance, Vice President, to announce the administration's space policy and direction for NASA. This was done at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum during a National Space Council meeting. This is the first meeting of this National Space Council, but that's not really what the news is. The basic gist of this administration's space policy is we will go back to the moon. And I think that's fine, with all the various things that this administration has done. Deciding that NASA should go back to the moon is the least harmful of pretty much anything. But it does bring to mind just a certain lack of long-term vision that our American political system is set up to have. It's basically cooked into the system. NASA's priorities are often seen like as a football to be kicked around, as a prize for a president or an administration to hang its hat on. In 2004, the Bush administration said, we're going to build new rockets and go back to the moon. And then the Obama administration said, no, we're going to go to an asteroid and go to Mars instead. And now we're going back to the moon again. It's just something that presidents have done for quite some time. This is not a recent thing. And I get into this a little bit with my guest for next week's interview. I have an interview coming up next week with a aerospace engineer friend of mine. We get to this topic of budgets and things like that. Really, whatever NASA's priority might be, we do live in a new age when there are many private companies doing various types of work as well. But in terms of NASA, leave it alone. Some of these projects, you say, do this, and it can take decades to plan and build the mission. And this is just a sign. I think it's not NASA should be doing something or should be doing something else. It's you're not spending enough money on it because NASA should be doing all of those things. I would love to see a tiny fraction of our enormous defense spending budget funneled over to NASA, and there are certainly many qualified people in the military who could work in the aerospace industry instead. We can go to the moon and to Mars and to the asteroids, and we can send the robot spacecraft all over the place. We could do all of those things if we only spent the money on it. And if we don't do it, somebody else probably will. If there is scientific value in it, or if there is a potential profit value in it, somebody's going to do it. Frankly, we should all do it. It's time to grow up and erase the borders and be humans and get this stuff done. All right, that was a bit more of a rant on this topic than I was planning, but there you go. At least for now, we're going back to the moon. Yay. Moving on to Beyond the Moon, Lockheed Martin unveiled details of their proposed base camp for Mars. Now, there are several different plans for going to Mars in the works. But the NASA plan, its so-called Journey to Mars, includes several steps along the way. In addition to the launch vehicle, a crew capsule, in this case the Orion multipurpose crew vehicle, and a space station beyond the moon, the Deep Space Gateway, they're also planning to construct a habitat orbiting Mars. In this case, it's been, at least for now, farmed out to contractor Lockheed Martin, and this past weekend at the International Astronautical Congress in Australia, they unveiled plans for this base camp. It is essentially a space station thing, not too dissimilar from the International Space Station, which will orbit Mars and be used as a launching point for astronauts to conduct research on the Martian surface. Lockheed has also unveiled plans for a Mars lander that would eventually take those astronauts from the station down to Mars. I guess the point of not going directly to Mars is that it is easier to hook up with a station in orbit and then make the step down to the planet at a later time. This station and the one slightly beyond the moon or in orbit of the moon, I'm reading both beyond the moon and orbiting the moon, would be used for various training and development of technologies that would be used to explore Mars. So that's an interesting design. This is one of those things, though, that I think hinges a bit on budget. If the budget stays in place for this, it might be built. If not, it was a nice idea. Let's boost that NASA budget so we can do all of these things. I have read other people talk about using Phobos as a base camp, so I'm not sure why NASA, or if NASA has explored that and decided it won't work. I believe the Russians were considering that. But anyway, on to Mars. And of course, any discussion about moving on to Mars has to include Elon Musk, right? Of course, my final story I'm going to hit on this week. Elon Musk in the news again for further plans to colonize Mars and make aerospace transit a reality. He unveiled this week a plan for something he calls the BFR. Now, this apparently stands for Big Falcon Rocket. That is not what I thought initially, and it's not what some other people thought, and it probably means both, the Big Effing Rocket. This is a large part of the plan to go to Mars, but also he is planning to adapt this for travel around the Earth, where you could potentially travel anywhere on the planet under 60 minutes. This is a pretty impressive and ambitious piece of technology. He is planning to complete at least 2 ships within 5 years to begin cargo runs to Mars. These ships would also be sent to Mars by 2022 to find the best source of water, water which will be key to making fuel for further exploration. Now, a lot of Elon Musk's projects seem like they are just enormously impossible and just pie in the sky. How could we ever do this? This sounds impossible. But I, also think that he, for one thing, puts his money where his mouth is. For another, has a proven track record with the current Falcon rocket being reusable and landing over and over again, and the success of Tesla and its battery system expanding beyond just automobiles. And the Hyperloop that he proposed, which sounded nuts in a way, has already had a number of its major components tested in the real world. So probably we'll have some version of this. And the thing about his budget is, unlike NASA, where he's at the whim of someone else, as long as he doesn't just actually run out of money, he can pay for it. So this rocket would be enormous. It does make me wonder what life might be like if we had global transport in such a fast amount of time. I don't know what kind of fuel that would use. If it would it displace airline travel and be using about the same amount of fuel as the planes that would have been used instead? It's just faster, or are we going to launch dozens of rockets a week traveling around and spew a bunch of pollution into the air? That's something I'd like to see a little bit more analysis of. But nonetheless, the large rockets in space would definitely be a necessary thing to fly people to Mars, to the moon. And the thing, despite the size of this thing and the amount of weight that it can lift off the planet, it is also in large part a reusable thing too. So unlike our Atlas rockets and such, you don't have to build them over and over and over again, hopefully. So we'll see. This is exciting. Just Mars in general is very exciting because now people are talking about 2022, 2024, 2026. It's not that far down the road where we might actually witness the first humans on Mars. All right, there's your show for the week. Thanks for hanging out and catching up on some science and futurism news. I hope you're looking forward to going to Mars. The show kind of started out on a downer today and a little bit of a rant on my part, but I hope finishing up with the near future exploration of Mars. Just think about that. That's really exciting. That's in my lifetime, being someone in his early 40s. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut for a while, like, well, a lot of kids do. And it was in the shuttle era, which was cool. The shuttle is very cool, and the science that was done was incredible. But space exploration, when I was a kid, was kind of functional. This is exciting. This is back to Apollo and Gemini and adventure to this too as well. I hope it sparks the human imagination and the human desire for civilization to continue. And maybe it will be something that binds more people together than anything we have now. The idea that we could be a multi-planet species, and once we leave the planet for good, all these arbitrary lines on the maps won't matter anymore. So, there you have it. You can visit the website, panfuture.org, to check out the show notes, get some more details about all the news that I covered today. And you can email me there. You can find the Twitter page and the Patreon page and the YouTube and all the other links and things. And as always, again, thank you for joining me. And I will talk to you again in the future.